Hi everyone, I'm Ayeshe. Please forgive me for the bad quality video. Um, I'm just using my mobile phone from rural Tasmania and I'm in my car. But I just thought recently there has been many revelations that certain teachers in Buddhism um, are sleeping with their students or abusing their students. I mean, this is not a new thing. This happens in many different religions and in different communities. Unfortunately, there is always an element of people that abuse others. But in religion, it's like a worse kind of betrayal of trust because you imbue that person with spiritual qualities. They're supposed to be a beacon of inspiration and virtue in the world, and then they betray your trust. And of course, teachers have a responsibility to their students to not break their trust and not abuse their trust. So I'm going to probably make a video on YouTube about this as well. But I just thought I'd briefly talk on it here. I am by no means a paragon of virtue. I'm just someone who is a socially engaged Buddhist and a feminist, as well as a practitioner and aspiring teacher. So, I mean, someone who is a teacher who aspires to be a good person. And because I'm outspoken about patriarchy, and patriarchy is interlinked with male violence and abuse, and inequality, which of course women in religion in general are not in a situation of having complete equality. So because I speak about this issue, I find myself in a position where a lot of people are coming forward to tell me or, say they've been abused. And it's actually like what we know publicly about teachers abusing students is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of all the women and some men who haven't come forward to say what has happened to them. And there is this idea, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, that if you come forward and say, I've been abused, that you're a blasphemer, that you're breaking the Dharma, you're breaking faith in Buddhism, that you're breaking the Samaya with the Guru. This is just not right. The responsibility of abuse and not abusing is with the abuser. It's not with the victim. It's not the job of the victim to hide abuse. What is abuse? That also is, kind of subjective. But, there is obviously some things that, some basic guidelines that we should follow, like the 5 precepts. The Buddha said, an ethical framework is the core of Buddhist practice. So I just want to say, before we start, that there are many good teachers. Not all teachers are abusive. Not all of Buddhism is terrible or corrupt or full of corrupt teachers, or that you should just abandon Buddhism right away. I'm just saying that for those who are already practicing, there are certain things you can look for to avoid ending up in a cult or ending up in an abusive situation. And you should use your own intelligence, and you should do some research and go slowly before you commit to a group or a teacher. It's easy to misunderstand, especially in Vajrayana Buddhism, where there is so much reliance on the guru, about what the role of a guru is. But it's really not that hard to understand that the Buddha taught ethics. And he taught the 5 precepts: don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't commit sexual misconduct, and don't take drug and intoxicants. So this is a basic thing. So if someone can't keep the 5 precepts, they probably shouldn't be teaching Buddhism. The Vajrayana vows and the Bodhisattva vows say don't harm. The first precept is don't harm others. First and foremost, do no harm. And have compassion for all beings. Restrain your senses. Keep compassion at all times. View other beings as having awakened potential, do not have a dualistic mindset. But that doesn't mean that, don't have a dualistic mindset, everything is emptiness. That doesn't mean that, that nothing matters, or you can just do anything, or, that anything you do without dualism isn't wrong. It's still wrong to abuse a child, even if you are so-called in a dualist, have realized selflessness. And to be honest, I don't believe someone who's realized selflessness would abuse a child. So it's not like emptiness or tantra is a hall pass to abuse other people. And it's a terrible thing. It makes people lose faith, and it makes them give up their spiritual practice. People come seeking, they're often people who are suffering. Sometimes they have trauma, and they're opening up to you as they would to a therapist, and you're abusing their trust by saying, hey, get intimate with me. You're using what you know about their vulnerabilities because they've opened up to you, because you're a spiritual teacher in a position of power and responsibility. You've used that responsibility, that intimacy, to take advantage and initiate some gain for yourself, which is wrong. So having said that, there are times when people do fall in love with each other, and maybe they're in a remote community and they end up falling in love. So what do you do then if that happens, that the teacher and the student end up falling in love? The teacher has to, they're the one who has to set the boundary and either say, you need, I'm no longer objective in my feelings for you, so we need to end this relationship. I can refer you to another teacher. Or they need to keep their feelings to themselves and, not take advantage of the student. But if it does happen that both of them are of age and, a certain amount of time has passed, the code of ethics, for example, at a place like Spirit Rock is that you declare it to the community that you end your relationship as a teacher and a student. And after 3 months, if you so wish, after you have ended that teacher-student relationship, you declare it publicly and you have a consensual relationship. That to me seems the very basic, like a psychologist has to wait 5 years until they could initiate, and they cannot be the psychologist of a client until they could become the partner of one of their client. So, somewhere in between those two, but declaring it openly and ending your position of power over that person, and giving that person time to establish whether they are really just imputing, and seduced by the power and position you have, or whether it's a genuine, equal, consensual, loving relationship. It's going to be fraught with difficulty. There is a very different kind of situation where the teacher is sleeping with multiple students and using their power to womanize, to seduce, to take advantage of, to defraud students, which is clearly unethical. I think generally, teachers need to avoid taking advantage of their students. But like I said, if it does happen that they fall in love, they need to end that teacher-student relationship, and the student needs to seek another teacher so that there is not this power imbalance, because for consent to be possible, both people need to have a certain level of awareness, sensitivity, compassion, and ethics, and be in a situation where they really can consent. If someone is saying to somebody else, sleep with me and you'll get spiritual blessings, you'll come closer to the Buddhas, you'll realize emptiness, no. run for the hills. The Venerable Tenzin Palmo asked the Dalai Lama who should be practicing secret sexual tantras, from the Vajrayana point of view, who is ready to do that. And he said, I can't think of one person. So this, do it, the idea of it being a tantric practice is very questionable. Only people who have realized emptiness and perfect bodhicitta are supposed to engage in these practices, and I myself can't personally, declare whether those practices are valid or not. But they're not meant for average or even slightly advanced people. And that's where another kind of element of how we objectify dakinis, we say, oh, a woman is a dakini and she's my dakini and she's my sexual partner in the bedroom and my cook in the kitchen and my secretary in the office, and I'm using her devotion and unpaid labor to run my center, and it's like, but, when we look at how many people are actual leaders, how many women are actual leaders in Tibetan Buddhism, it's really minuscule and really disappointing how much women's labor is being used without actually them having equal leadership positions, without them having positions as throne holders, and how much ethnocentrism there is. It's very disappointing, And when there is this expectation of a nun in a nunnery becoming the consort to some lama who is 3 times their age, it's really very questionable to me as to whether that young woman is old enough to consent, and whether those kind of mindsets, which were maybe practiced in feudal Tibet, are appropriate in the modern world. So, in terms of what is the philosophical foundation for holding teachers accountable for abuse, and what is abuse, the Buddha clearly said in the Kalama Sutta, he said a teacher should be blameless. A teacher should not be, you can look this up in the Pali Canon, the Kalama Sutta, Kalama. Of course, this is a Theravadan teaching, but I think we need to return to the basics, because a lot of people don't seem to know the basics, and they end up in this situation where they are being taken advantage of. And everybody around them kind of has groupthink, like, oh, it's a blessing. He touched you. Oh, it's a blessing. Or, he pimped you out to another lama. It's a blessing. It's not okay. And it's a sad thing for me to see other nuns I know who were touched by somebody or who were exploited and disrobed. It's sad for me to see that there isn't equal leadership for women. It's sad for me to see that people who profess to be bodhisattvas are not behaving like that. At least do no harm, or take responsibility for what you did do, and don't kind of talk a high game, but even the basics are lacking in your most basic behavior. Like Padmasambhava said, your view could be as high as the sky, but your conduct must be as fine as barley flour. So, in the Kalama Sutta, somebody says, we're really confused, Buddha. We're really confused about who is a good teacher, who we should follow, what is a good teaching, because all the elders we know, all the gurus we know claim to praise their own teachings and belittle the teachings of others and say they know the true path and others do not. So they praise themselves and revile others. And the Buddha said, you should know a teaching, a good teaching and a good teacher, not just because it has been told by your elders, not just because they're famous, not just because it's part of your culture, not just because you feel a good feeling in your heart, but by their results you shall know them. By the results of the teacher and the teachings you shall know them. That is what he says in the Kalama Sutta. He says, greed, ignorance, self-obsession in a teacher leads to bad results, and leads to bad results in the practitioner also. A teaching that is based on greed, based on ignorance, based on harm, based on self-serving, leads to suffering. And he said, a teacher who is skillful, ethical, blameless, who works for long-term happiness, a teacher that has a lack of delusion, and has good results. You know, these qualities are skillful and blameless and lead to a good result in this life and in future lives. And then he talks about, you know, a practice of pervading the 10 directions with loving kindness, with no evil thought for anyone, with goodwill, free from ill will, free of hostility. It leads to happiness and a good rebirth in the here and in the future. So all the teachings are there, you know, the ethical conduct is there, the Vinaya Pitaka, self-liberation vows, the 5 precepts, communal bodhisattva vows, do no harm, have boundless compassion for all beings, do not cause others to lose faith in the teachings, do not steal the resources of someone who is deeply meditating and give it to someone who is just reciting texts, don't destroy property, don't destroy towns or countries through war, don't kill living beings, don't sell drugs, don't take intoxicants, don't steal others' partners, don't be licentious, don't practice sexual abuse. These teachings are all written into the teachings of the Buddha, you know, and sometimes I think it's maybe our lack of the basics of Buddhism that has led us to where we are now, because we were reaching for something very high and esoteric, but we neglected basic ethical conduct, you know, and I find that so sad, that people were reaching for something so high, but they ended up missing the wood for the trees, so to speak. So, you know, I suppose the root yana, the Theravada, is supposed to be the foundation upon which we build. Ethics is supposed to be the foundation upon which we build our practice. So if we don't have that, and if we don't get the basics of generosity and ethics and loving kindness and a regular shamatha meditation practice, taming our mind, if we neglect those basic things like kindness to others, service, generosity, ethics, if we don't study the basic teachings like the 10 non-virtues, like karma, like the 4 thoughts that turn the mind from samsara, like the pervasive nature of suffering with an ignorant mind, the impermanence and death, the precious human rebirth, and the need to practice Dharma. If we don't have these kind of foundational teachings, reaching for something higher and taking a lot of initiations with a teacher that you're actually supposed to examine them for years, and you're supposed to do the preliminary practices, the Nundro, 100,000 prostrations, 100,000 refuge prayers, 100,000 Vajrasattva mantras, 100,000 mandala offerings. You're supposed to do these things before, to purify your mind and to establish. It's like getting married, you know, taking a higher tantra initiation from a guru is like getting married to them. So you wouldn't just, unless you're on drugs or really drunk, you wouldn't just, you know, marry someone without knowing them or without checking out who they are. And yet we do this, you know, we know some big lamas in town, so we think, cool, I can't wait to start doing this tantra practice, you know, and we get in over our heads before we've even examined. And it actually says in the teachings, you know, not to examine the teacher is like drinking poison. And it says not to examine the student is like jumping off a cliff. So there is also, you know, texts like the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, which say how a Bodhisattva is supposed to conduct themselves. You know, Bodhisattvas are supposed to be selfless, caring. They're supposed to put others before themselves. They're supposed to be balanced and kind. And also, you know, the Vajrayana texts, especially like the 50 verses of Guru devotion, it says how the guru is supposed to conduct themselves. You know, their behavior externally is supposed to comport to the Theravada or the root yana, and their inward motivation is supposed to be bodhicitta, and their secret behavior is supposed to comply with the Vajrayana, you know. And the only people that practice crazy wisdom are people who are enlightened. And even those saints, you know, they benefited others. They didn't harm others. And there's a reason there's only 84 Mahasiddhas, you know, because that path is not for everyone. It is a very narrow path. It is like flying a supersonic jet. It requires a great deal of training and information, you know. And personally, from my point of view, the reason why I now follow what I call the Mahayana forest tradition, which is a fusion of early Buddhist sutras found in the Theravada and found in the forest tradition, and the Mahayana, the Bodhisattva texts like the Bodhisattva's Way of Life and the things we find in Zen and meditation. A lot of those basic practices is because I feel like the guru's system is so prone to abuse, in the sense that we hand over absolute power to the guru. The thing is, though, you're supposed to examine the guru, you're supposed to be rational, and you're supposed to not lose your own sense of self, not lose your own sense of intuition, of healthy boundaries. And considering the amount of abuse there is now, it's really hard to kind of, in the modern world, embrace a system based on faith, you know, when teachers are not behaving in a way that inspires faith. And, you know, people, I think another thing is like why we find it so shocking when a teacher we love is found to be sleeping with their students or abusing children or defrauding people. It's because the teachings they gave changed us. And that makes us question, well, was that experience of faith real? Or was I deluding myself all along? And that's what's so heartbreaking, you know, because we associate that person with the teachings they gave. But in Buddhism, we say, test the teachings like a goldsmith tests gold in order to determine their purity. And we also say, look at the meaning, not the dogma. Look to the teachings, not to the teacher. People can be good and bad. You know, they can have a good side and they can have a bad side. Because they made a mistake doesn't mean they're a completely rotten person or a waste of space. But we all have our trauma. I think it's realistic to look at what is the background of some of these teachers. You know, they have the trauma of being a refugee. They also have the trauma of being taken away from their loving parents and put in a monastery, raised by people who are maybe not their parents. And often they were separated from women, any kind of female influence. I'm not saying all of them are like that. You know, every Lama, every Rinpoche has their own way of being raised. I'm not an expert on that. I'm just saying from my own, what I've seen. And I think maybe being separated from women so young, being separated from family so young, may make them develop some strange ideas about women. You know, being forced, having celibacy forced on you and not choosing it could be another issue, you know, in the sense that people are not becoming a monastic because they feel called to monastic life or because they've actually experienced worldly life and become weary of it. They've actually never had a chance to have a normal life or to experience sensual pleasures or, you know, just a normal life, a normal loving romantic relationship. They never had that, so how can they renounce what they never had? There are so many reasons. You know, we can't forget that the people who are both victims and perpetrators are human and fallible, you know, and doesn't mean they're completely bad people, but it also doesn't mean that we can sweep what they've done under the cover, and that we should silence, especially the women that are coming forward to talk about this as a problem. And I think there is, you know, a spectrum of abuse. There may be a situation where a woman slept with a teacher because she felt she was in love with him and she wanted it. and maybe the teacher thought they loved her too, and some of those relationships have gone on to become a relationship where they become translators together or they run a Dharma center together. And then there are just situations that are completely abusive where, the teacher is hitting people, is touching women who don't want to be touched. And also maybe there's something in between where a woman may sleep with a teacher and think she had he really loved her, and then find out he's got women all over town, and she was just used. And so there's a spectrum of abuse. Yeah, and it's messy. That's why it is so much better to wait, to disengage from that teacher-student relationship and either avoid it or properly declare it. There's a better way to carry this forward. But I'm not just talking about relationships where people genuinely fall in love. I'm talking about relationships where people have used their power to control, beat, harass, exploit, and there is a big spectrum. There was one Buddhist community where the children in that community were systematically abused by the teacher, and those children were used as labor. I don't think they even got to go to school regularly, which was pretty shocking. So it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, we're supposed to be Buddhists, we're supposed to be compassionate, we're supposed to be enlightened. How can we so completely fail to protect women, to believe survivors of abuse? I'm not saying that whoever comes forward accusing a teacher of abuse should just automatically be believed. There should be a proper external organization that investigates and clarifies these allegations, but often if one woman comes forward, then more women will come forward. It usually takes one woman who's willing to receive a great deal of online trolling and threats and suffering, like that Leslie, the ex-student of Trungpa Rinpoche, who was ex-consort of Trungpa, who came forward and received a great deal of online abuse, because she was very open about what it was like to be a consort and what was going on in terms of the drug abuse and the womanizing and whatever else. I just don't think it helps anyone to hide all of this, to keep it under the carpet, especially when some of these teachers continue to abuse and beat and molest women or children. And, we do need to return to the basic teachings. And if someone has made a mistake, if they've done something like that, they should declare it and then take a 3-year break from teaching minimum. Like just declaring it and then 6 months later coming back to teaching, it's like they haven't got the message at all. And the problem is this isn't an equal playing field. Women and men are still not equal in Buddhism. Most centers at the top are still controlled by Tibetan men, especially in Tibetan Buddhism. Even in, Theravada, monks receive a lot more donations and have a lot more property than nuns. There's still, apart from like Korea or Taiwan, there's still a lot more monks than nuns. There's, for example, about 100 nunneries in India for Himalayan women and about 1,000 for Himalayan men. And 98% of reported rapes never lead to a conviction. So even women who come forward, not only do they face a lot of trauma in bringing the story to light, they're not believed, they're trolled, they're vilified, and they're separated. In the case of when it's abuse in a religious community, they're separated from the religious community. They lose their community. They're not believed. They're seen as a troublemaker. And it's so sad because the actual person who does the abuse continues to operate. And the woman who comes forward, sometimes, like recently in Australia, there was a woman who committed suicide. And one of her ex-partners believes she committed suicide because of the rape she endured at the hands of the Attorney General of Australia. So these men are still in power at the highest levels of court. Like Kavanaugh, who was accused of rape, is on the Supreme Court. I can't say who is guilty and who is not, but I can say that there are definitely people in high places who protect other rapists and child abusers. And I mean, look at Epstein, what happened there, how he disappeared and nobody is being persecuted for that. So at the highest levels of society, this kind of abuse is being perpetuated and covered up. And women are being, objectified, and their labor is being exploited, their sexuality is being exploited, their faith is being exploited. So this is not the teaching of the Buddha. And this is not, someone should not come to a place for solace and end up getting raped. That's just not right. And why is it so hard for us to accept this? If our practice, our religion can't hold up to scrutiny, and if we can't show some compassion to rape survivors and to people who are abused in the face of this kind of drama, our response is to just sweep it under the carpet. Maybe there's something wrong with the way we're practicing. Maybe we're more interested in preserving our privilege and our power than we are in helping others find freedom and helping people live a better life, which doesn't say much about our practice. So yeah, it's just not right. It's not right to abuse women, and an ethical framework is so crucial to what the Buddha taught. And as I said, this crazy wisdom stuff is it's for people who have already realized emptiness and perfect bodhicitta, which most of us have not. So keep your conduct, as fine as barley flour, and if you're someone who is very charismatic and likes to sleep with multiple people, don't do it with your students. Find partners, declare openly that you're polyamorous, and do that outside your sangha. Don't do it inside your sangha, because a teacher has more privilege. A teacher has a responsibility to protect their students, to protect their faith, even if they're not perfect, which many of us are not. None of us are Buddhas yet. Most of us are not anyway. We're just people trying to practice, trying to live a good life with the limitations, delusion and trauma that we have, and maybe it's time that we stop, kind of putting people on pedestals so that the fall is so far when they hit the floor. I mean, even the idea that a dakini is there for the man, to give him cities, rather than as an embodiment of wisdom herself, as something to be emulated and adored, rather than kind of employed by men for their own pleasure. And the fact that, these teachings were given and held by men. I actually have a friend in Ladakh who is a Geshe Ma, which is a doctorate of divinity, and she translated this story for me of this nun. Her name doesn't come to mind right now, unfortunately. It was many years ago, but this was in the Zanskar Valley, and there was a nun who was said to have great realizations, who performed miracles, who found springs of water for people in the village, who started giving teachings on emptiness and serving the local community, became very popular, and wrote a treatise on advanced Buddhist philosophy. And the monks were so jealous, they drove her out of the valley and they imprisoned her text. And the text is under lock and key to this day. So, for me, that the story of that very directly embodied the glass ceiling I've always felt since I became a nun and was told to pray to be reborn as a man. That patriarchy is still a very big problem. And though they say, oh, look, we have Tara, oh, look, we have Yeshe Sogyal, those archetypes are archetypes. They don't want real women with real questions and real fierce compassion holding them accountable, and questioning the vision of feminine, the sacred feminine that they claim to champion as Vajrayana practitioners. Like, it's one of the Vajrayana vows to see women as an embodiment of wisdom. So if you're abusing women, how can you see them as an embodiment of wisdom if you're using them for your own pleasure rather than for their enlightenment? How does that gel with respecting women as the embodiment of wisdom? So for myself, all of this controversy and abuse is really sad. As I said, I'm by no means a perfect person, but it has made me look at the relationship, the absolute power of the guru dynamic, and it's made me think that the original, more basic mode of the Kalyana Mitra, the spiritual friend, who's like a big brother or big sister, who is just a friend who helps you along the path rather than the light on the path. The guru is only meant to be an archetype anyway. He or she is only meant to be a mirror of the awakening that you yourself possess. So giving away your own power was never what was intended by the guru-student relationship. So, I hope that some of you who have been abused or who have heard these stories and feel like, wow, Buddhism is just so bad and everybody's in denial and their agenda is to suppress women and to, it's corrupt and they don't care about their students, they don't care about compassion, they just want to hide all of this. How could this happen in my beloved religion? I hope you feel that at least someone is talking about this, somebody cares. There are people who don't want to see this happen, who want to see, basic ethical frameworks for teacher-student behavior, and who care about survivors of abuse, and who care about equality in Buddhism and accountability, and that it's not okay to abuse women and children or men, and that there is still good people, there is still goodness and good teachers and plenty of teachers. The majority of teachers are not abusing, but maybe we need a bit of a shake-up, to realize that we have to protect these teachings, that we have a moral duty to uphold and look after the interests of the people who come to us as vulnerable people seeking an end to suffering. But it is sad to see, even after you warn certain people, they're so besotted by the cultural reification, the Shangri-Laization. They're spiritual materialists. They're exoticizing something, where they're so fascinated by the rituals and by the person that they don't examine properly them as a whole human being, their behavior, before they dive into a relationship, some kind of initiatory relationship with someone as well. And, there might be reasons why someone ends up in an abusive relationship. Here, I'm not at all trying to be blaming survivors, but I'm just saying that even though you'll tell people this is going on, they won't believe you, and only years later will say, oh, you were right. And, there may be reasons why people end up in an abusive situation that have to do with their childhood trauma, or that they were groomed as children by sexual abusers to be compliant. And even the grooming we have by patriarchy as women is to respect our elders, is to respect men, is to respect authority, is to respect religious leaders. So some of how we end up being abused is also not our own fault, because we were groomed. We were groomed by patriarchy. We were groomed by sexual abusers themselves. Even the way we tell children, go and hug Uncle Joe, who's really creepy and everything, like he makes your skin crawl, but we're telling a child to obey us rather than listen to their own body, what their own body is telling them. Even that is a form of grooming, and not consensual. We're telling a child that their bodily autonomy, that their bodily boundaries doesn't matter. And, of course, the other side of the coin is, as I mentioned before, that some of these teachers are really socially isolated and lonely, and they're on a pedestal. It's lonely up there. They don't have anyone to confide in, and they have the burden of carrying this, burden of faith and people's ideals, but in that situation, maybe they need to find some peers, they need to find some counseling, they need to find some friends, some social activities outside of their role as a teacher, which is not always easy as a monk or a nun, or someone who's very easily recognized. But we have to humanize them and allow them to have a life, as long as they're not hurting anyone, But playing that out with your students, people who are vulnerable, people who have faith in you, is a bit like the psychologist-client relationship, or the doctor sick person relationship, which is one of privilege, one of trust, one of vulnerability, one of confidentiality. And, of course, people will say, oh, when you talk about these things, you're destroying people's faith, you're destroying Buddhism. But as I said, it's not the responsibility of women to hide abuse, or for survivors to hide abuse. It is the responsibility of people in power not to abuse. And if certain articles or certain information, certain accusations turn out to not be true, I think it's good to not immediately jump the gun and assume the worst, but to take time and see and investigate, from an external source, an external organization, a bit like Project Sunshine, to give everybody a fair chance to tell their side of the story, but to not keep hounding people who come forward with concerns. And for me, men who quote known abusers of women, it's so triggering as a rape survivor to hear this kind of thing, like some lama who used to punch nuns in the stomach or used to touch people without consent being quoted as, and them talking about the ultimate nature of mind, and how, like, out of context, it can seem like they're saying nothing matters, or that to hold people accountable for moral conduct is prudish and Victorian, or to hear people ridicule rape survivors with jokes about rape contracts and, feminists are the devil kind of thing. It's not the agenda of people like myself or feminists to hate men or to vilify men or to say all men are evil. What we are saying is that the system of dominance that oppresses women is not healthy for either men or women. I'm not saying all men are abusers, and I'm not saying all women are saints, but that dynamic of a culture of dominance is not healthy and not serving either women or men. And it's just a fact that men control most of the world's land, most of the world's resources. They earn more money. They still have more power. They're like 70% of representatives in parliament. You know, I'm not, feminists are not saying men don't suffer or that men don't have good potential or that there aren't good men. There are many good men. And we hope that those good men will come forward as our allies to end this abuse. And it's also true that women can be the enablers of patriarchy. I mean, look at how many centers controlled by men are enabled by women. And look at how many women, especially lay women, are supporting nuns or are supporting female teachers, you know, which is also a shame. Like, we wonder why there are no female teachers. We wonder why we don't have gender equality. And we look at who you're supporting. And is there real equality? Is there real empowerment of women in your center? Is there a policy of, you know, mentoring women as leaders? Is your male teacher committed to empowering women and keeping them safe? Do they address systemic racism or systemic sexism? Are they committed to justice, or is their talk about compassion just an echo, an empty, hollow echo that doesn't touch real world suffering? So this is my 2 cents, so to speak, on, you know, keeping faith when abuse takes place. I think to remember the you know, teachers, community are valuable, and to go to places that do nourish your practice, what you most deeply value. But remember, Buddha nature was always inside you. The teachings are a guide. The teachings are your refuge. The experiences you had are still real. And that person who gave you those teachings probably also has Buddha nature and also has good qualities and a lot of really interesting talents. You know, it's not that they're without talent or charisma or genius. It's just that the power got to them, you know, and they made a mistake. So it doesn't completely invalidate what you've been taught or your own potential or the path, you know. But like the Buddha said, test the teachings yourself and look at the result. Look at the result in your own practice, in your own experience, and take the teachings as your refuge and, you know, be guided by compassion and ethical conduct. And do the best you can. You know, we all fall down, but we keep getting up and we keep supporting each other, and doing the best we can to live a noble life, to serve others, to purify our mind. And, you know, the faith shouldn't be blind faith. You know, you lose faith when that's why it's so painful. It's so shocking when someone comes forward with a tale of abuse, you know, and that's why we don't want to hear it, because it breaks our illusions, you know. But if it is an illusion, if it is an unhealthy community where abuse is enabled, maybe it needed to be shattered. But there is still some good in the broken, you know, in the broken shards of what we used to know. There may still be some truth with which we can weave a new loom of possibility of something better, which is a better, more healthy, more noble collaboration between men and women and non-binary people, a loving, beloved community. I mean, it's interesting to remember that even people like Martin Luther King cheated on his wife. Gandhi said some racist things. You know, Mother Teresa made some mistakes. That doesn't mean that the other stuff they did wasn't good, you know. So we take the good and we put aside the bad, we learn from it, and we don't repeat it. But first and foremost, do no harm. Yeah, so I think, so yeah, I guess I could look at what people are saying here. Balance ourselves, balance the earth. Genuine realization of non-duality inspires to one live very ethically and to do goodness. Thanks, Olivia, for saying that. Those who use non-duality as an excuse for abuse have no genuine insight. I think that's also true. You know, there is a difference between non-duality and spiritual bypassing. And, you know, the Buddha taught two truths, not just one truth. He taught the relative and the ultimate. So once again, your view may be as high as the sky, but your conduct must be as fine as barley flour. And the thing about non-duality is that you realize you're in a sacred relationship with the earth, with all beings, with everything in life, so that others are your second self. What you do to others, you do to yourself. And therefore, the very, you know, after having had a genuine experience of sacredness, of oneness, you become even more committed to, as much as possible, reducing harm and benefiting others, not harming them, not exploiting them. So of course, you know, there is always the ideal and then there is the reality, and sometimes we fall short. But it is the journey between the reality and the ideal that is the rich field of growth. Yeah. Does anyone have anything they want me to say or answer before I wrap up? As I said, I'll probably make a teaching like this on YouTube, on the Bodhicitta Foundation YouTube channel in a few days. This teaching will eventually disappear. But before I go, to any of you, there's not that many of you watching anyway. A lot of people are at work or asleep. Does anyone have any questions or comments? I'm sure there'll be some people, you know, some trolls coming on later on. Yeshe hates men. Da 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 da. I look forward to no, I don't really look forward to seeing what they have to say. But, you know, of course, there is a lot of people who view me as a very outspoken and people who, you know, are shocked by the things I say in terms of breaking orthodoxy within Tibetan Buddhism. Yeah. Anyway, I wish you all well, and thank you for watching this teaching. And I hope that we can work together in future to create fourfold sanghas, monks, nuns, laywomen, laymen, non-binary people, and priests, monk priests who are in between lay and monastic, you know, to building more healthy communities across all traditions of Buddhism, so that people are not harmed, and especially women's potential is equal and recognized as much as men's potential is. So thank you and all the best.